Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziol Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziol Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Sibiel. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwen. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwen, near the main door, Cruz found Louis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as Cruz continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Louis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Louis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwen's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwen might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Louis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Louis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, Cruz confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Malang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwyn and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwyn had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Though the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwyn's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwyn in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwyn. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwyn was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwyn, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lavella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Lewis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwyn's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwyn's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders, he had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine, the family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwyn's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwyn, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwyn and Louis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Aldo Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwyn almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. In Michigan, there is a small town called Traverse City, with a population of about 15,000. It is famous for the picturesque Lake Michigan, on the shores of which several resorts can be found. In the summer, a large number of tourists are attracted by festivals and water sports events. They come to swim, ride boats, enjoy delicious local food, and appreciate the unique landscapes around Lakes Michigan. In the winter, the area is snowy and quiet, there are few tourists, and life flows very slowly. It was in such a place that 18-year-old Kaylee Bruce lived and worked. She was always a cheerful and bright person. In addition, she was very smart, attractive, and determined. By the 1990s, she was considering pursuing an education. Thanks to her academic success in high school, she managed to gain admission to Northwestern Michigan College without any problems. The educational institution was located in Traverse City. To support herself away from her parents, Kaylee worked as receptionist of a local beach condominium company that rented out apartments, rooms, and houses to visitors. The condominium was situated right on the lake and was very popular during the tourist season. On the evening of Monday, February 16, 1998, Kaylee worked at beach condominiums from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. In February, there were virtually no tourists, only a few locals, so she was almost alone in the building. The night before, while talking to her friend Kim, who also worked at the condominium, she had expressed her eagerness for the start of the season, hoping for more guests and an increase in her salary. That same day, with a little over an hour left before the end of her shift, Kaylee had to do some light cleaning, put everything in the utility room, and then go home. That evening, Kim was not on shift but was passing by the beach condominiums at about 7:30 p.m. She had been driving her friends home after they had spent time together at a restaurant. As Kim drove past Beach Condominium, she looked toward the office through the window and noticed a light in the area of the administration desk, where Kaylee was preparing to close up. Kim wanted to quickly drop off her friends and then stop by to see Kaylee. However, when Kim returned about 40 minutes later, she saw that the light inside was off and Kaylee was nowhere to be found. Thinking she was late and that her friend had already left. Satisfied that her friend had gone home, she turned around and left. The next morning, on Tuesday, February 17, 1998, at about 7 a.m., the first person to arrive at the Beach Condominium's office was an air conditioning technician named Zachary Medden. He immediately noticed that the door was unlocked. Although this did not cause him alarm, he calmly walked inside and called out Kaylee's name. Receiving no answer, he saw that no one was at the reception desk where Kaylee should have already been preparing for her workday. She was never late and usually arrived early. All the lights were off, and Zachary walked around the floor. He noticed a glimmer through the crack of a door and decided to investigate further. When he got closer, he saw suspicious red stains near the threshold. It was unclear what it was, but when he opened the door, he realized the horrendous nature of the scene. In horror, Zachary ran away and immediately called emergency services at 911. When the police arrived, Zachary could barely speak, looking emotionally traumatized and barely holding back tears as he described the situation. The scene found in the utility room was soon deemed one of the most horrifying crime scenes in local law enforcement history. In the small room, where household appliances and cleaning supplies were stored, there was blood everywhere, on the walls, even the ceiling. In the middle of the room was the mutilated body of a girl. The victim was Kaylee Bruce, the 18-year-old employee. Next to her body lay all the broken pieces, with shards of plastic and metal covered in dried blood, as well as particles of scalp and hair. Kaylee was found naked, with one of the power cords from an iron wound tightly around her neck, cutting into her skin and crushing her larynx. According to the medical examiner's report, the victim had 19 deep lacerations that cut down to the bone. Her skull was crushed from numerous blows, fractures of the vault and facial bones were found. Severe injuries to her neck and throat were consistent with strangulation, indicating she had been beaten for an extended period with blunt objects on her body, abdomen, chest, and pelvis, leading to numerous internal bleeding. The most horrific detail discovered was a metal pin inserted into her perineum with such force that it damaged the tissues up to the pelvic bone, penetrating several centimeters into it. According to forensic experts, Kaylee remained alive for some time after sustaining this injury until she eventually bled out. Her death was undoubtedly a painful one. The entire small utility room was covered with her blood, and it was smeared over her body as if she had fought back. Despite the small size of the room, it took forensic experts 6 hours to collect dozens of pieces of evidence. They discovered numerous defensive injuries, indicating a brutal struggle, along with signs of disorder around the area. Apparently, Kaylee's resistance only angered her attacker. Footprints and similar traces were found strewn on the floor, suggesting that the attacker had jumped on Kaylee in an attempt to cover this terrible incident. Local reports described the scene, and the first thing that struck the arriving journalist was the amount of blood. He immediately realized they were dealing with one of the most terrible crimes in the town's history. Despite years of experience reporting from dozens of bloody crime scenes, he had never seen such cruelty before. He labeled the criminal a real monster and couldn't comprehend what could drive someone to commit such an atrocity against an innocent 18-year-old girl. Kaylee Bruce died at about 8 p.m. the previous day. It is possible that when Kim was standing outside the office, her friend was already beyond help. She herself miraculously avoided a collision with the killer. Kaylee's family was shocked by such a brutal murder and could not understand who could wish harm to such a sweet girl. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances told detectives that Kaylee was a very nice and kind person. No one had ever heard anyone speak badly of her. It was hard to imagine that someone would have a motive to attack her. Some items were missing from the crime scene, but nothing significant, so the theory of a robbery gone wrong was not considered. Detectives suspected that the perpetrator must have known Kaylee personally, given the brutal nature of the attack. Revenge, hatred, or jealousy seemed likely motives. The attacker was probably observing her and knew her daily routine, allowing him to choose the moment when Kaylee would be most vulnerable. He likely knew when to strike so that no one would be nearby, and she might have trusted him. They decided to search for the criminal among Kaylee's immediate acquaintances and among local residents who might have been in regular contact with her, possibly even living nearby. Unfortunately, there were no CCTV cameras on the premises of the resort or even inside the office, which left them without clues. All the blood at the crime scene was analyzed and confirmed to belong to the victim, but no fingerprints could be found. It was clear that the perpetrator had some criminal experience. He was probably wearing gloves or had carefully erased all traces of his presence. The forensic team collected more than 100 pieces of evidence from the small utility room. The only trace left by the aggressor were boot prints found on the body and the bloody floor. Forensic experts used a special substance that allowed them to obtain a clearer pattern of the shoe's sole along with all the small details. When the police received a full footprint, they assessed the killer's size. He had to be a tall, strong man who wore large shoes. The print had a clear tread, resembled work shoes. Detectives visited local stores to find a similar pair and discovered that the prints matched shoes from a brand called Pajar. When combined with the prints found on Kaylee's body, they turned out to be identical, leading to a person who likely used specific clothing. The young man who worked in the condominium quickly attracted the authorities' attention, Zachary Medden, who discovered the body and reported it to the police. Detectives were alarmed that he had gone to the police to report finding the body. This was a tactic sometimes used by murderers hoping to remove suspicion from themselves and gather information about the progress of the investigation. Zachary was taken to the station for an official interrogation to verify and exclude him from the list of suspects. He was still visibly shaken by what he had seen, struggling to control himself, and appeared sincere. Zachary voluntarily allowed his car to be searched. The investigation had reached a dead end, with no valuable information emerging and all suspects cleared. The excitement in a local community was reaching its peak. It became almost impossible to buy a regular pepper spray for self-defense, as supplies were quickly depleted. The main customers were schoolgirls and female students, afraid to walk alone or go out at night. One of the detectives arrived at the college dormitory where Kaylee studied, and witnesses reported several suspicious young people who had already checked in there. They needed to be checked. In the end, it turned out that they were not involved. The detectives spoke to their friend Kim, who knew Kaylee better than anyone else in the city. She said that shortly before the murder, Kaylee had broken up with her boyfriend, whose name was Dylan. They broke up and started dating again. As far as Kim knew, they had broken up again, but Dylan desperately tried to renew contact with Kaylee. He was obsessively persistent, even manipulative. They talked to him just 2 days after the murder. Dylan worked with heating, air conditioning equipment and serviced the units. They immediately noticed that he had boots of the brand Pilar, similar in size to the footprints found at the crime scene. Dylan had several pairs of the same brand, which were immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. However, no traces of blood could be found on them. Of course, he could have had other similar boots that he got rid of after the attack, but no matter how hard the police tried, they could not find any evidence against Dylan. Additionally, he had a reliable alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. The killer could now be tens or even hundreds of kilometers away from the condominium, but the degree of cruelty suggested great hatred or sadistic inclinations. They were looking for all criminals prone to attacking women who had recently been released from prison and lived in the area. However, all efforts were in vain. During the inspection of the hill, a small metal rod was found. It was a part of a car tire valve. On it, they found Kaylee's blood and several hairs that did not belong to her. One of them had an entire follicle, which allowed them to create a DNA profile of the probable criminal. Hopes for this were still low as the technology at the time was not yet perfect. In any case, this version needed to be checked, and that took time. They decided to use all the meager materials available to them. They organized a press conference and appealed to the public. The key moment on which they focused was the problem of numerous false statements. People contacted the police station, and all leads were checked. One person who contacted them was a local resident who worked as a presenter at a radio station. His name was John Chandler. He immediately noted that his information could help find the criminal. On February 26, 1998, 10 days after the murder of Kaylee and following the press conference, John went to change the tires on his car. Near the resort area, there was an industrial park and a tire factory that he visited. While in the waiting room, he accidentally overheard the manager talking to the rest of the staff, trying to find one of the workers. The employees were discussing that a technician had not shown up for work and had not been seen for several days. They had all seen the press conference, so they suspected something was wrong. There were rumors that the missing man had a very bad character. One colleague mentioned that a day after the murder of Kaylee, he had seen this technician wearing boots of the brand Pajar, which had suspicious dark spots. A day later, he bought himself new shoes and did not wear that pair again. After hearing all of this, John immediately called the police station to request that they check this tip. He felt that this information was very important, and the detectives were convinced of its significance. They went to the tire factory. The manager immediately admitted that John's words were true. Colleagues that morning had discussed one of the employees of the organization, who turned out to be 25-year-old Kevin Holzer, the son of the director of the company. Several employees confirmed that he always wore large-sized Pajar boots while on shift. A few days after the murder, he had a new pair. After examining the area where Kevin usually worked, detectives noticed that small metal rods from tire valves were lying around on the floor. They looked very similar to the evidence from the crime scene. Local workers confirmed that these rods often flew off when changing tires. Now the police were sure that John's statement was leading them in the right direction. Their suspicions only grew stronger when they found out that Kevin had been renting a room in beach condominiums where Kaylee worked for 6 months. He had the opportunity to observe her, calculate her daily routine, and choose the right time when she would be alone. In fact, Kevin spoke with investigators as early as 8 a.m. on February 17th, when Kaylee's body was found. He was the only one who did not ask what had happened, which seemed strange. Kevin claimed he had quickly gone to work at the plant. Due to the lengthy process of examining the crime scene and collecting evidence, the detectives did not have the necessary clues when they spoke to Kevin. It became apparent that the criminal could have been in their hands from the very first minutes of the investigation, but he managed to slip away. The new main suspect was now wearing Pajar boots of the same size. It was decided to reanalyze the collected data and follow up on everything the local residents had said. The detectives spoke to one resident of beach condominiums. She said that, day of the attack, she returned home from work in the evening at about 10 p.m. The door was open, although she perfectly remembered locking it. It turned out that the master key had disappeared from the reception desk. Suspicions against Kevin were confirmed by Kaylee's friend Kim, who said that he often ran into the office and lingered at the reception desk while Kaylee worked there. Kim believed that Kaylee liked Kevin, so he tried to spend any free minute chatting, even on far-fetched topics. He constantly asked to be let into his apartment with spare keys, which only the condominium administrator had access to. He claimed that he had forgotten or lost his own key. It seemed he was just looking for a reason to get closer to Kaylee. Kevin was tall, athletic, practiced martial arts. He looked like a likely killer, but they failed to find him. He simply ran away. In search of additional information, they went to the tire factory where he worked and checked the guy's biography. They managed to find out that Kevin had problems with the police 5 years before the murder. He had been accused of abuse. In the late hours, Christina was returning home from a bar when a stranger grabbed her and dragged her into an alley, then began to beat her. She sustained very serious injuries and was sure that she was saved by a miracle. Realizing that the criminal wouldn't stop, Christina pretended to be dead and offered no resistance. As soon as she stopped moving, the criminal simply lost interest and left. Apparently, the attacker enjoyed beating and killing women, which was very disturbing. The potential serial killer could be anywhere, and now no one was safe. Trying to understand the moment when Kevin escaped, they realized that he had disappeared from all radar as soon as the press conference was over, which announced the size, brand of the shoes and the tread pattern he had worn before. In order to scare off the probable killer, the police obtained an arrest warrant and went to his apartment, but nothing valuable for their investigation could be found. There were no bloody shoes or clothing, and they even checked the drains in the bathroom, but found no traces of blood. This puzzled the detectives. Around the same time, a friend named Mike contacted the police station. He was very worried and said that he might know where to look for Kaylee's killer. Just before this, he and his friend, Kevin, had spent Friday night at a club. They were drinking and chatting after a new press conference had been held. Detectives got a warrant for Kevin's arrest. During the party, Mike's phone rang. On the other end was another friend who asked where Kevin was, that the main suspect in the murder who was sitting across from Mike. Kevin became noticeably nervous, but Mike managed to say that his girlfriend had called and asked him to come home. Kevin did not suspect anything and said it was time for him to go. Mike walked Kevin to the parking lot, where they said goodbye and went their separate ways. As soon as Kevin disappeared from sight, Mike immediately called the police station, providing a description of Kevin's car and clothing. Mike had said he was heading south but gave no exact directions. Kevin was driving a noticeably gold-colored car, which was quickly tracked down. Detectives arrived at the parking lot, but the car was abandoned, and Kevin was not there. It seemed he had managed to escape punishment again. The police spoke to the guard, who admitted that he had talked with Kevin for a long time before Kevin fled. He reportedly headed to Indiana and planned to use the train. The detectives were following Kevin closely, but he was slightly ahead. During this same period, testing of hair found on the metal part of Kaylee's body was completed. The blood from this small piece belonged to Kaylee Bruce, while the hair was male. Samples were taken from Kevin's apartment, allowing for a comparison of the criminal's DNA profile, which matched completely. They feared that he, like a cornered animal, could start killing again, but they managed to intercept and arrest him. Earlier, during his transfer to Chicago, he had refused to cooperate with the investigation and immediately demanded a lawyer. However, the evidence against him was irrefutable, and the prosecutor considered the trial a mere formality. Detectives discovered that Kevin had moved into the beach condominiums just 6 months before the murder. They suspected that he had not chosen his victim randomly. They believed he probably liked Kaylee and became obsessed with her, eventually stalking her. When he found out that Kaylee would be working and studying in the city, he decided to get as close to her as possible. Naturally, all this could not end well. On June 21, 1999, Kevin Holzer's trial began. He was charged with the murder of Kaylee Bruce. Despite his father's wealth and a smart defense attorney, it seemed even the attorney considered his client guilty and did not even attempt to acquit him. In October 1999, the jury decided that Kevin Holzer was guilty of first-degree murder, and he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In the years since before Kevin was convicted of abuse, there may have been more attacks. Their suspicion was investigated, but it was not possible to confirm these assumptions. Everyone in his circle was in danger. In which, the witness finds her apartment door open when she comes home from work. She is shocked by the lucky coincidence that she was missed by Kevin Holzer. The police believe this was not an accident. He had stolen the master key and used someone else's apartment because he knew that no one would be there for quite a long time. After the massacre, he entered someone else's territory to take a shower and wash away the traces of the attack. Kevin actually had no feelings for Kaylee except cruelty. Any girl could have been in her place. He intentionally found excuses to approach her, chat with her, and ask for her keys because he wanted to learn how to get them. He carefully calculated Kaylee's schedule as soon as she first talked to him. The lives of Traverse City residents were divided into before and after the murder of Kaylee Bruce. This massacre was so cruel and senseless that the crime is still imprinted in the memory of many townspeople. Tiffany James was born on August 18, 1980, in Tampa, Florida. She was the only child of Rosalind James and Turner Humphrey. Her parents were never married and separated soon after her birth. Her father moved away, started a new family, and showed little interest in her. Years later, as an adult, Tiffany decided to locate her father. They spoke, and she assured him that she held no grudges and wanted to keep in touch. This reunion allowed Tiffany to meet her half-siblings and their families, leading to the development of strong, positive relationships. Meanwhile, Rosalind focused on her own life and left Tiffany with her grandparents. Although Tiffany had both biological parents, she was primarily raised by her grandparents. Her mother Rosalind visited occasionally but did not play an active role in her upbringing. It was her aunts, Barbara and Vicky, along with her grandmother Beulah, who took on the parenting responsibilities. They ensured Tiffany attended preschool and school, celebrated her achievements, and supported her in every way. She was an outstanding student with a passion for literature and a creative spirit. She dreamed of opening her own beauty salon and becoming the best in her city. Tiffany was a sociable, popular, and stylish person. She often attracted attention with her looks and confidence, making her appealing to young men. While in high school, she started dating a boy named Derek Andrews, who was a year older. They both believed their love would last forever. In her senior year, Tiffany became pregnant and gave birth to their first child, a son named Derek, on July 26, 1998. This changed her plans for college, as she dedicated herself to motherhood. Derek took on various odd jobs to support his family, while Tiffany's family helped them as much as they could. In August 2002, 4-year-old Derek became a big brother when his parents welcomed another son, Darian, named after his paternal grandfather. At this point, Tiffany and Derek were living together in a small rented apartment. Although money was tight, they remained hopeful for their future and dreamed of creating a stable life together. A couple of years later, however, their romantic feelings faded, and they decided to separate amicably. The son stayed with Tiffany while Derek supported them and made an effort to spend time with his children. He eventually began a new relationship but remained committed to being an involved father to Darian and Derek. As a single mother with 2 young sons, Tiffany started to seriously consider her future. She wanted a career that would allow her to provide for her family independently. Since she had not pursued further education after high school, she was eager to change that. Tiffany enrolled in a medical college, aiming to become a cosmetic specialist. Her ultimate goal was to open her own practice or even a clinic where she could turn her passion into a successful business. To manage her finances better, she moved back in with her grandparents, as paying for both tuition and rent was too much of a burden. Her family helped care for her sons whenever she was at work or in class. After finishing her education, she got a job at a private clinic as an assistant to a well-known doctor. She had a steady income and began advancing in her career. For a while, it appeared that everything was finally coming together for her. However, she found herself lacking a strong, supportive partner to lean on during difficult times. In early 2007, Tiffany met a man named Daryl Williams. He was 14 years older than she was and had 3 grown children from a previous marriage. Despite their age difference, this did not hinder their romantic relationship. She believed that he was a mature and trustworthy man, genuinely prepared for a serious commitment. Their relationship developed quickly, and soon, Tiffany, at 27, found herself pregnant. This news shocked both of them, but they were excited, and Daryl proposed to Tiffany, who happily accepted. However, during the routine checkup, she learned she was expecting twins. In March 2008, she welcomed twin girls, whom she named Diamond and Denial. This happy event has brought joy to her life, and she has devoted all her love to her family, cherishing every moment spent together. Tiffany enjoyed taking her children to different events, discovering new activities, and creating lasting memories. She also loved dressing her daughters in matching outfits that gave them a fashionable appearance. Her older sons participated in sports like baseball, track, and swimming, while her twins, Diamond and Denia, began dance classes and rhythmic gymnastics at an early age. As the years went by, the children grew, but Tiffany and Daryl never married. Gradually, their relationship began to deteriorate as they found it increasingly difficult to communicate. Tiffany eventually realized that Daryl was not the person she had thought he was. Their relationship ended when she discovered his infidelity. Without any hesitation, she gathered her children and departed. After separating from Daryl, Tiffany relocated with her family to the quiet town of Brandon, Florida. This community was known for its strong infrastructure, low crime rates, and affordable housing, making it an ideal place to raise a family and start over. Eager to create a stable future, Tiffany completed a hairstyling program and landed a job at one of the top salons in town. She quickly built a loyal clientele and gained a reputation for her talent and creativity. Aspiring to open her own salon one day, she began looking for potential rental locations. Her skills, ambition, and rising reputation established her as one of the most in-demand stylists in the area, paving the way for a bright career ahead. As a single mother of 4, she moved into a spacious rental apartment in a newly built residential complex situated in one of the town's finest neighborhoods. Nearby amenities included a school, a dance studio, and a large sports center, everything she needed for a comfortable and fulfilling life for her family. By 2012, her sons had become more independent and often helped care for their younger sisters. Around this time, Tiffany decided to reconnect with her father and half-siblings. She traveled to Alabama to find them, and their family bonds were restored. They began to stay in touch, visit each other for holidays, and their children quickly grew close. Life was falling into place. Her finances were stable, and she was surrounded by loved ones. Although she felt secure about her future, Tiffany, a young, ambitious, and attractive woman, yearned for romance. She still believed in love and hoped to find a man who would love her and embrace her family, a man with whom she could build a strong and happy home. In 2014, Tiffany started her own small business, which began to thrive. That same year, at 34 years old, she reconnected with Ben, a man she had known in her youth but hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Their unexpected encounter at a shopping mall marked the start of something special. Initially, they kept their relationship private. Ben was also a single parent who had recently settled in Brandon with his 2 young children. They began as friends, sharing coffee and meaningful conversations. When Ben finally confessed his feelings for Tiffany, she felt like the happiest woman in the world and admitted she felt the same way. Their relationship grew deeper and both families supported it. Tiffany was ecstatic, savoring this newfound happiness without rushing. She kept their romance discreet, sharing details only with her closest friends and family and refraining from posting pictures of them together on social media. Gradually, she prepared for a significant change as they decided to move in together and create a home as one family. On October 1, 2015, Tiffany posted a romantic and mysterious message on her personal social media account. The post featured a photo of 2 hands clasped together, one male and one female, both adorned with wedding bands, set against the backdrop of a Bible. The caption simply read, "Yes." This suggested that she was engaged, but she chose to keep her fiancé's identity a secret for the time being. Tiffany and her family always put a lot of effort into celebrating Halloween. They planned their costumes ahead of time, carved pumpkins into glowing lanterns, and went out to collect candy from their neighbors. By this time, Darian and Derek were old enough to enjoy the holiday with their friends, while the younger twins, Diamond and Denia, still loved going trick-or-treating with their mom. Since they lived in a large apartment complex, going door-to-door wasn't this thrilling. Instead, they visited a nearby neighborhood filled with single-family homes, where Halloween decorations created a festive atmosphere. Families in costumes moved from house to house, and generous homeowners made sure to have plenty of candy, so no one went home empty-handed. That night was supposed to be fun and relaxing, but no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. A local woman was home alone, preparing to watch a horror movie to get into the Halloween spirit. The streets outside were quiet, most families had already gone home, and she didn't expect any more trick-or-treaters. Around 9 p.m., she was dozing on the couch with the TV still on when suddenly there was a loud noise, like an explosion, that woke her up. At that moment, her front door, which she had forgotten to lock, swung open. Startled, she quickly got up to shut it. What she saw on her doorstep left her frozen. A figure dressed entirely in black, wearing a hockey mask like the ones from the Friday the 13th movies, stood there. Instead of a machete, the person was holding a shotgun. For a split second, it felt like a scene from a movie or an elaborate Halloween joke. In shock and unsure of her next move, she glanced down and saw a woman lying at the figure's feet, writhing in pain and struggling to move. The masked figure looked down at her for a moment before raising the weapon again. Terrified, the woman ran for her life. She slammed the door just as two more deafening gunshots rang out. Collapsing onto the floor, she covered her head with her hands, fearing she might be next. Then, silence. The stillness was broken by a faint tapping on the window. At first, she ignored it, too frightened to move. But when the tapping came again, she cautiously approached the window and, against her better judgment, looked outside. There stood a young girl, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking of her own safety, the woman rushed to the door to help. Outside, she noticed another young girl sitting on the ground, shocked, hugging her knees. Without hesitation, she brought both girls inside, locked the door, and grabbed her phone to call for emergency services. By that time, other neighbors had heard the chaos and called the authorities. When first responders arrived, they discovered a woman lying in a pool of blood on the pavement. Despite her critical injuries, she was still alive. Paramedics did everything they could, but unfortunately, on the way to the hospital, she died from her wounds. The victim had no identification, and the two young girls were too traumatized to speak. However, as more neighbors gathered, they quickly recognized the woman, Tiffany, who is the owner of a local hair salon, along with her twin daughters, Diamond and Denaya. Authorities immediately contacted Tiffany's relatives, while Diamond and Denaya were taken to the hospital for evaluation. Fortunately, neither child had suffered any physical injuries, but they were deeply traumatized. Mental health professionals were brought in to help them process the event. Many people had been out celebrating that night, and several witnesses recalled the horrifying scene. However, piecing together the full story was challenging, as many struggled to believe what they had seen. It all felt too surreal, almost like a staged performance. Meanwhile, the masked attacker slipped into the crowd of costumed revelers and disappeared without a trace. Neighbors reported seeing a silver Chevrolet sedan parked near the house shortly before the incident. Witnesses noted that the car sped off after the first loud noise but stopped a short distance away moments later. It was uncertain whether the driver fled in a panic or had a connection to the attack. Unfortunately, no one saw the license plate, and no one could identify the driver's gender. Adding to the difficulty, there were no security cameras in the area to capture the incident. Witnesses could not provide even a basic description of the suspect, who was fully covered in a costume, hood, hockey mask, and gloves. They only agreed that the attacker was slightly taller than average and had a muscular build. At the crime scene, Tiffany's handbag was found on the ground, with its strap torn and its contents strewn about. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, but this theory was quickly dismissed. The cash inside the purse was untouched, and Tiffany was still wearing several pieces of gold jewelry. Nothing had been stolen. Moreover, it seemed unlikely that such a violent act would occur over a simple mugging, especially with a shotgun involved. The aggression of the attack suggested that it was personal. But who would want to harm Tiffany, a cherished mother and respected community member? Investigators began by questioning her ex-partners and her current boyfriend. Tiffany had been separated from her former partners, Derek Andrews and Daryl Williams, for years, and any previous conflicts had long since dissipated. Her current partner, Ben, remained a mystery since Tiffany had kept their relationship private, revealing little to friends and family. Due to this secrecy, detectives felt it necessary to question him urgently. Officers arrived at Ben's house around 5 a.m. the next morning. Despite the early hour, all the lights in the house were on, and Ben was found sitting by the front door with a shotgun. The officers ordered him to drop the weapon and raise his hands, which he complied with, insisting he was not involved in the attack. He then pleaded with the officers to protect his children, explaining that he had learned about the crime just hours earlier and was fearful that the attacker might come after him next. He felt a strong need to protect his family. During the questioning, Ben shared that in the months prior to the incident, Tiffany had told him about someone she believed was stalking her. She suspected it might be her ex-fiancé, Daryl, who who was also the father of her twin daughters, Diamond and Denia. Their separation had been difficult, and they were currently engaged in a custody battle over the girls. Ben confirmed his whereabouts on Halloween night with a strong alibi. He stated that he, Tiffany, and their children had gone trick-or-treating earlier that evening. Later, he took his children to visit relatives while Tiffany and the twins intended to return to their home briefly before staying the night at his place. However, she never showed up. Almost at midnight, Tiffany's oldest son called to deliver the devastating news. Once investigators verified Ben's alibi, they released him and allowed him to go home. The focus then shifted to Daryl. Was he involved in such a violent act? Detectives were skeptical. Could he really have committed something so horrific in front of his own daughters, leaving them with lifelong trauma? On November 1st, officers visited Daryl's last known address but found that he no longer lived there. Instead, they encountered his adult daughter, who informed them that her father had moved in with his new girlfriend 6 months ago. She was visibly shaken when she heard about Tiffany's tragic death and was clearly in shock. His daughter disclosed concerning information about his short temper and controlling behavior. He was known to be domineering and would become furious when things didn't go his way. Additionally, he had a strong interest in firearms and owned a shotgun. Daryl's daughter explained that her father's breakup with Tiffany had been very contentious. He harbored deep resentment over having to pay child support and had fought hard for full custody of their twins, even though he knew he had little chance of winning. However, she noted that if Tiffany were gone, he would have had a better chance of gaining custody of the girls. Her daughter described her father as ruthless and believed he was capable of committing a crime. After speaking with her, investigators went to Daryl's workplace, a large chemical plant. His supervisor spoke highly of him, describing him as a dedicated worker who could handle the workload of 2 people and was always willing to take on extra shifts. However, Daryl's aggressive demeanor often led to conflicts with co-workers, sometimes resulting in physical confrontations. Notably, on the night of November 1st, Daryl, for the first time, refused a last-minute shift change, citing personal reasons. This unusual behavior raised further suspicions, as it left him without a confirmed alibi for the night of the crime. Detectives visited the home of Daryl's new girlfriend, Rosalind. They noticed a silver Chevrolet sedan in the driveway that matched the description of a car seen near the crime scene. When Rosalind answered the door and saw the officers, she appeared nervous. However, after learning the reason for their visit, she insisted that Daryl had stayed with her all night and had not left the house. Since there was no physical evidence to hold Daryl, the investigators decided to interview the main witnesses, Daryl and Tiffany's daughters, Diamond and Denia. They were still struggling to cope with the trauma. Denia was mostly silent, experienced nightmares, and couldn't sleep without the lights on. Diamond seemed to handle things better but would break down in tears whenever the conversation shifted to that tragic night. To help them, a skilled psychologist was brought in to gently support the sisters through their trauma, and over time, they began to share their experiences. They revealed that while staying with their father, they often saw a mysterious man delivering folders of papers to him. One day, when their father stepped out, they couldn't resist their curiosity and peeked inside the folders, discovering photos of their home, pictures of their mother in various locations around town, and even images of Ben's house. This leads them to realize that their father has employed a private investigator to follow their mother, Tiffany. Even more concerning was the fact that just 2 days before Tiffany's death, she had won full custody of the twins in court, requiring Daryl to pay child support, a situation he strongly opposed. With this new evidence, the police obtained a warrant for Daryl's arrest. Given his known history with firearms and the likelihood that he might resist, the officers decided it would be safer to arrest him at work, where security was tight, minimizing the risk of an armed confrontation. When the officers arrived, Daryl appeared shocked but did not resist arrest. He calmly allowed them to handcuff him and requested to speak with a lawyer. Initially, both he and Rosalind denied any involvement in the crime. However, investigators found phone records and GPS data showing they were both near the crime scene that night. Rosalind was the first to cooperate. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to testify against Daryl, stating that she had not known his exact intentions, she had merely driven him to the location and waited in the car. When she heard a loud noise, she panicked and drove off but slowed down to let Daryl jump in before fleeing. She claimed that she later provided him with an alibi out of fear for her own safety. Daryl faced charges of first-degree homicide, which could lead to the death penalty. In an attempt to escape this severe punishment, he tried to shift the blame. Upon learning that Rosalind had testified against him, he accused her of having an affair with his adult son and claimed that they had conspired to frame him. He was willing to implicate his own son in a serious crime to save himself. However, investigators quickly disproved his claims by thoroughly examining the evidence and confirming that his son had no involvement in the events of that night. With no alternatives available, Daryl eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. In April 2017, at the age of 49, he was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after at least 25 years.